Hello, I'm Vinny Raniolo, and welcome to my rhythm guitar lesson. If you've ever played rhythm guitar, and I hope most of you have, you know that there's a lot of options. It could be very overwhelming. There's a lot of strings, there's a lot of frets, there's a lot of chords, there's a lot. So in this lesson, I'm going to help you focus and simplify using a technique that I really enjoy using and that I've spent a lot of time thinking about. I use it in performance as well as just for practice because it's very challenging both musically and mentally and physically. I really enjoy it. So it's a three-string approach that was developed mainly, I think, by Freddie Green and Bucky Pizzarelli are the first ones that I know that have used this approach. They've played in big bands, and they developed this because a big band has a lot going on. You don't need all the upper extensions. You don't need the big chords. What this does is really simplify it to the bare minimum of what you need in the chord, and really that's what sounds the best in many situations when you're playing rhythm. So it just uses the three strings, the E, D, and G strings. So let's start before I talk any more about this because I could talk all day about it. I love it. Let's get in tune. So here's your E string, your low E. Here's your A string. Here's your D string. Your G string. Your B string, and your high E string. And now, even though we're only going to use those three strings, the E, D, and G strings, it's good to be in tune. So now you must be thinking, well, what about that A string in the middle? Well, that A string, we're not going to play. We're going to deaden that note somehow, either using our other fingers, if there's a bar chord, or the palm of our hand, or just it's not going to ring. And actually, that string is going to add to the percussiveness of this, because that dead string, that's all it does, is just add a percussive sound. So you may not even need a drummer after this lesson. So also, another great thing about it is that it provides a consistent sound throughout your rhythm playing because you're using the same strings throughout the entire song. So, you know, on the guitar, each string has its own timbre. So by doing this, it keeps a consistent timbre. Also, you can see the moving voices. A lot of times with your chord grips that you know, you're just moving shapes all over, and maybe it gets a little lost in the Rubik's Cube of what a fretboard looks like. So with this, you're able to see it. And it's more like a piano, being able to see the notes laid out in front of you and how they move. So that really helps with the musicality and just the basic understanding of what you're playing. Also, it eliminates that slidey noise that we get when we move up and down the fretboard. So this will help us move more economically so we're not shifting all over the fretboard. And if we are moving positions, it's in a progressive way so that there's the least amount of motion possible to move between these chords. All right, I'm going to teach you a couple songs at the end, but first let's start with just learning our chords, our 1 chord, our 5 chord, then our 1, 6, 2, 5 chord progression, and then we'll focus on some songs. All right, let's get started. Okay, now that we know our 1 chord, the C major chord, and our 5 chord, the G7 chord, now for a 1, 6, 2, 5 chord progression, now we need to learn our 6 chord and our 2 chord. Let's start with our 6 chord. So in the key of C, that's going to be an A minor chord. And now to put it on the E, D, and G strings, we're going to have to figure out where's the best place to put that. So I like to play it here, the 5th fret on the E string, the low E string, skip the A string, 5th fret on the D string, which is our G note, 5th fret on the 5th fret on the G string, which is our C note. So it's all the 5th fret. I like to use my middle finger, my ring finger, and my pinky. Now I should mention that fingerings don't really aren't specific. They don't really matter so much. It's a preference, just like the way you hold your pick. Also, it's good to play these with different fingerings. Like here I could start with my first finger, and here I could start with my second finger. Right now we're going to start with the second finger, but in your own practice you should play them all different fingerings, because it might change depending on what chord you're coming from and what chord you're going to. So now let's try to switch between the C, which is the 1 chord, and the A minor 7, which is the 6 chord. So from the C major, we have our second finger on the 3rd fret. That's going to slide up to our A string. And then our second finger, which is on the 3rd, the E note, is going to move up to the flat 7. And our pinky is just going to stay the same. That C is another common tone. So just like in the C major to the G7, we had that G as a common tone. Now, between the C major and the A minor 7, we now have C, that note that our pinky is on, as our common tone. So we could switch between those fairly easily. Now let's play that A minor 7. Let's just make sure that we're playing everything clearly. So let's play each note individually as an arpeggio first. So look at my right hand and see how I'm picking it. So it helps to make sure that everything's coming out clean. Now let's strum it. Now let's add a little upstroke to it. Now I should also mention that upstroke, if you're not feeling comfortable with it right away, then take some time off from it and just do the downstrokes, because that upstroke, if you're playing with a band, it may affect the time, that extra beat, if you're not comfortable with it. There's nothing wrong with just doing downstrokes. Actually, in a lot of situations, it sounds better just to have that nice meaty sound without any other noise going on. See how nice that sounds? Okay, so now we got our 1 chord to the 6 chord. So let's practice playing that. So take a look at my left hand again, and let's play through that, just switching really slowly. So the 1 chord, and the pinky doesn't have to go anywhere. Okay, now let's talk about the last chord that we're missing. It's the D minor 7 chord. We all know or should know our D minor chord like this. So now let's take the notes of this chord and put it to those 3 strings that we're using, the E, D, and G strings. So I like to use this as my first note. It's the 5th of D minor 7. It's the A note on the low E string. And then I'll put the 3rd of the chord, the flat 3rd of D minor 7, which is the F. I'll put that on the 3rd fret of the D string. And then this flat 7 is on the G string on the 5th fret. It's a C note. And I'm playing that with my pinky. You could also voice it like this, the A, F, and C. So you got your 5th, your flat 3rd, flat 7th to build the D minor 7 chord. So let's do that. Let's arpeggiate that like we have with every other chord. So look at my right hand again, see how I'm picking it. You'll notice that it's the same for every chord because it's the same strings. But this is always good to do to make sure that there's no buzzes and everything rings out clearly. Because since we're only playing 3 strings, it's so important that each string rings out clearly so you really hear the quality of the chord. So now let's practice. In this chord progression, we're going to switch between the 6 chord and the 2 chord. So let's practice that. Now, this is a situation where even though we're playing the same note for both chords, that A note, we may have to switch our fingers. We can't use a common tone, although it is a common tone, but we can't use a common fingering because we have to move our fingers around to get to that D minor 7 chord. So what I'm doing is I'm switching out my second finger here. I'm putting my third finger there to replace that. It's the same note, and then I'm using my first finger to play the F on the D string, the 3rd fret, and then the pinky stays the same. So here's another situation where we have another common fingering. So from the C to the A minor 7 to the D minor 7, you can leave that pinky, you can just leave it there for the whole three notes. It's being used as the root, now it's being used as the 3rd, and now it's being used as the flat 7. So that's pretty interesting. And now from our D minor 7 to the G7, let's look at that. So now from the A, which is the 5th of the D minor chord, we're going to move down to the G string. I'm going to use my second finger. So I'm taking this 3rd finger, the ring finger, using my second finger for the G. And now the F, even though it's the same note, because we're going from the flat 3rd of the D minor chord to now it's going to be the flat 7 of the G7 chord. It's a common tone, but we can't use a common fingering. So I'm going to move my second finger down to the G, my 3rd finger is going to go on the F on the D string, and then my pinky is just going to slide down to the B, which is the 3rd. So here's D minor to G, D minor 7 to G7. Okay, now let's take the whole chord progression. So it's going to be a C major chord, an A minor 7 chord, a D minor 7 chord, and a G7 chord. So let's take that really slowly. Here's the 1, the 6, which is the A minor 7, the 2, which is the D minor 7, and the G7, which is the 5. Let's do it one more time. So C, our 1 chord, A minor 7, our 6 chord, D minor 7, our 2 chord, and G7, our 5 chord. Now let's pick up the tempo a little bit. So here's our C, A minor, our D minor 7, G7, the 1, to the 6, to the 2, to the 5, back to the 1. So there you have it, the most popular chord in jazz music and probably in music in general, the 1-6-2-5 chord progression. Now the next segments, let's put these chords that we've learned to a song. All right, see you next time.